aligned action. I think now it's 2025, it's a big year, here we are all in Brazil. That alignment has really sort of, I think, come together in a much sort of clearer way, which is you need to do this stuff quickly and you need to do it transparently. There have been updates to the SBTI flag guidance, there have been updates to the science-based targets for nature that have all said, you know, we're not going to throw a new target date at you, we're not going to put these external, you know, bounds around you, we're going to say, tell us how quickly you can eliminate land use change from your supply chain, tell us how you're going to get there, be transparent. I think that the extent to which that ask has really converged across all these spaces has been really helpful in trying to keep our eye on the ball in terms of prioritizing land use change. All right. The third thing that we know is that for companies that produce or source agricultural or forestry products, deforestation and conversion are often the majority, sometimes up to 90% of their flag emissions footprint. So if companies are serious about meeting their climate goals, then this is what they need to do, full stop. I think that this is not easy. None of this is easy. If we say we have a roadmap, that doesn't mean it's an easy roadmap to follow. But I think what needs to happen, and this is why we're really working hard with these alignment across these climate, nature, forest frameworks, is, you know, we need to create both the enabling environment and the internal sort of will and incentives within companies to actually make this happen. And, you know, I think it's really becoming increasingly clear that, you know, eliminating this land use change, including both deforestation and conversion of grasslands, savannas, and other ecosystems, is the single most impactful action that a company can take to meet flag emissions targets. So if there's a company that produces or sources agricultural or forestry commodities, they want to set a science-based target to reduce emissions. They need to set a flag target. This is what they have to do. So in order to take a closer look at that, we worked with the consultancy at Astra to model what an average company, so basically the way that if an average company is following the accountability framework's guidance to reduce land use change in their footprint, what impact does it actually have on their flag emissions? So we modeled a couple of commodities and a couple of contexts with them to say, okay, for, you know, a company sourcing soy in Brazil, what is land use change within your footprint? If you followed the framework, took these actions to address deforestation and conversion, what happens to your emissions footprint? So here's an example of that sort of hot off the presses modeling work we did with them that shows for soy in Brazil, for example, land use change emissions, you know, is the lion's share of flag emissions, and 75% of those land use change emissions are from non-forests. They're from savannas, they're from grasslands. So what that means is that, for example, there's lots of different regulations, processes, policies out there to try to address deforestation. There's EUDR, there's the Amazon Storm Moratorium. If companies are following these structures, for example, if a company sourced only EUDR compliant volumes, it does have an impact. It reduces flag emissions by about 12% by 2030, for example, if they only did that. However, that doesn't get you all the way there. The accountability framework recommends stepping back, looking at all of the supply chain, not just subsets of it, not just the farms in your supply chain, but across your sourcing areas, and looking at all ecosystem types. So if you were to follow the framework's guidance, if you were to work across your supply chain to eliminate land use change in all different ecosystems, you're going to have 22% flag emissions reduction by 2030 and a 65% flag emissions reductions by 2050. We worked with them to model other things as well, not just land use change. So we looked at things like yield improvements, things like soil sequestration, and these do have an impact. But as you can see, it's really sort of dwarfed by what you see with the land use change. All right, I have one more of these, and then I'm done. So another one of these, we looked at palm oil in Malaysia. And I think, you know, the way that the accountability framework's guidance can really help here is the AFI says, you know what, we're going to look across a lot of different tools. A company isn't going to get rid of all the land use change in their footprint using one tool. There's going to be certification, there's going to be policy, there's going to be regulation, there's going to be direct engagement with suppliers. So what we see is that, for example, to reduce land use change associated with palm oil in Malaysia, each of these different instruments can play a role. So can you step back and you say, what's the menu of instruments available? So if you, for example, were sourcing 1/3 of your volumes from RSPO certified palm oil, if you sourced another third from EUDR compliant plantations, if you worked with the last third to halt further conversion after 2025, you're going to slowly piece these things together to get to your flag emissions targets. So bottom line, is that companies can significantly reduce their flag emissions by taking these really well understood steps to achieve DCF supply chains. Yeah, that's what I got.
Thank you. Great. So, Pete, I'm now going to turn over to you. As a theoretician and modeler myself, I'm definitely sometimes guilty of the, well, in theory works in practice type of thinking, so no pressure as our industry representative. But, McDonald's has obviously been working on sustainable sourcing, on deforestation, on climate for many years across many regions, across many commodities. And we'd really just love to hear a little bit about how you take some of these big goals, these big guidance, and actually translate those into sourcing policies, and also how you tell if those sourcing policies are having the types of effects that you want to achieve.
Well, thank you very much, Emily, and I'm hoping I'm holding this close enough to my mouth for everybody to hear me. Really pleased to be here to talk to you all. I'm not going to go into the context. You guys did a great job of explaining why we're working on these issues. And McDonald's is a company. We were the first global restaurant company to set a science-based target. We've had restrictions and requirements on suppliers around forests since the 1980s, but we significantly strengthened them back in 2015 when we launched our forest commitment. We've just updated that to a forest and natural ecosystem commitment as well to reflect the change in expectations of a business like ours. Our science-based targets are all aligned with 1.5. We have a net zero target. We have flag targets. We've got land use change in there. We have a significant bar to reach as a company, and we're taking a lot of effort to try to meet that. And I'll explain a little bit about the practicalities of going about addressing that, linking our forest commitment to our sustainable sourcing strategies and to the science-based target that we have. But just to give you a little bit of context in terms of the size of business that we're operating over and the size of the challenge that we have. McDonald's you'll know McDonald's as a brand around the world. We feed about 1% of the world's population every day come and enjoy eating in McDonald's. We have operations in over 100 countries. We have 40,000 restaurants around the world, so 40,000 communities that we're serving food in. We have thousands of suppliers and millions of farmers that feed into that. And so our business at each end of the value chain is dependent on our franchisees seeing a future to investing in our business, and millions of farmers around the world seeing a future to invest in their business to produce food that our customers want to eat. And so trying to lead change through a business of that degree of complexity is a challenge. And so where do we start with that? Starts by prioritization for McDonald's. So whatever we're working in, we prioritize. And when we were working on forests, WWF and AFI frameworks helped us to prioritize where we took action, where our biggest areas would be to be able to have a positive impact. And not only in terms of commodities, clearly beef, soy, palm, those types of commodities, but also whereabouts in the world we should be focusing as well. So we have a particular focus in beef, as you can imagine, in Brazil, but also in Argentina, Paraguay, and Australia too. And then the challenges around communication. So clear communication. When we're looking at forest goals, a lot of our forest goals have been achieved through sustainable sourcing commitments. So we say to our suppliers, this is the standard we want you to source to. That's easy in an area where you have got a third-party accreditation that you can source to. More difficult, as we found in beef, where we don't have that. So we've set up our own satellite mapping monitoring systems to be able to track the beef that's coming into our supply chain and understand how much of that meets all of the criteria that we have to meet for that. It becomes even more difficult when regulation gets involved in it, because that's taking us in some slightly different directions, as we've seen with EUDR from using third-party accreditations. Now that's the simple stuff. When it gets into climate and looking at drivers for climate, that's where it gets much more difficult. Now we can do a lot of that modeling, the footprinting, that's relatively simple. Tracking change is really difficult. So looking at all those individual millions of farmers, how they're changing, their production systems, and the impact on the greenhouse gas emissions from those production systems, that is super challenging work, and it needs frameworks which are really practical, which meet the real world as it is, not as we would like it to look on paper. We would all like a nice, neat world, but that's not how supply chains function. They've grown up like that to become more resilient, to make sure that we get the right product to the right place at the right quality at the right time. If we simplify them too much, the challenge is that we end up investing more in things like steel work, pipes, tanks, silos, segregation, ships, containers, than we're actually investing on the ground with farmers to deliver the change that we need to incentivize them to leave natural ecosystems and forests standing, to adapt their agricultural practices to become more resilient as well. The other thing we found as we've gone through this is that we don't just need to invest in the farms that supply us now. We want to continue to grow our business, as all businesses do, and so we need to be able to invest in the businesses that have the potential to supply us as well. And so we need to make sure that those frameworks that we're operating in are able to reward us for taking that action, not just in farms that supply us, but in the future farms as well, to be able to de-risk whole sourcing areas. And I'm encouraged of late by some of the changes that we're seeing in some of the frameworks that we operate in. I think some of them are, when they meet in contact with reality, are finding that actually the world is really, really complicated. And it's not that we can't take action on the ground. It's the fact of getting that through the messy middle and being able to package that up into a nice, clean claim is particularly difficult for a number of brands out there. And the longer the supply chain is, the more difficult it is to do that. But also it affects that investment case. So we're taking these actions as a business. We want to increase scale. We want to have more positive impact, and we need to make business cases, like every single other business decision we make for this. And if I can make a business case where I can put together that I am de-risking our supply chain, that I am increasing the resiliency of our farmers, that I am safeguarding natural ecosystems, that I am reducing our emissions, that I am sequestering more carbon, all of those stack up and stack up and stack up, and it enables us not only to invest our own capital into these projects, but to also get to a point where we are able to bring in other capital to invest in that project, to scale it further and bring in other support, not only from our suppliers, but also peer companies as well. So I suppose I would leave it with 3 words, and happy to answer more questions about the approach. But the what I'm thinking around is impact. We want to all have a positive impact. We do not want to invest more time, hassle, money in the center of this. We want to make sure that we are having a positive impact on the real world, not on the facts and the figures that we trade up and down the supply chains. We want to make sure that we have integrity, though. We need to make sure that these things don't unravel on us, that we are actually having the impact that we think that we're having and that we're talking about having, but above all, a focus on implementation. I think that if we can bring forward more successful projects, that gives everybody confidence that we can do this. We can move forward. We can make the world a better place. We have a lot of proof points of us already doing that, and just last month we invested $200 million in a project in the US across 38 states on regenerative agriculture. We want more of that. We want to do more of that positive impact on the ground with the farmers that supply us. And and we want to work with the frameworks and the data systems that exist to help us to direct that positive impact on the ground.
Great, thank you. And I think a number of you have discussed this kind of complexity of the situation, both across geographies. And I think when we're discussing such a diffuse driver like deforestation and conversion, there is this underlying fear and worry that we're playing this reactionary game of we focus one place and shift the problem to someone else, or someone who's not acting kind of takes up those issues. And so for all of my panelists here, how do we work towards getting out of that dilemma and making sure that the actions that we are taking in setting priorities, and as individual supply chains are actors focusing on areas and places, that is really pushing us towards collective and actual change on the ground.
Do you want me to have a first go at answering this one? Yeah, okay. I'll
Go
keep
for
the
it.
mic. Yeah, I'll keep the mic. What we've seen this in practice when we've implemented sourcing policies, that there are others out there who don't have those ambitious policies, and there are other customers for the products that we would source, and that does two things. One, it makes potentially makes sourcing areas more risky for us because we are trying to source in there. It puts the potential product price up for us, but it also means that we're then pushed towards those segregated channels, which increase that middle ground cost without actually increasing the benefit for the farmer. And so looking at investing across landscapes to provide incentives for not just producers who wouldn't already meet our requirements, but producers who actually want to get into a position to meet our requirements in the future, or that we want to get into that position to meet our requirements. We think that's the key to unlocking this, because we know that we've been working on these programs for a long time. We know that there are still challenges, as Andre pointed out. And so by investing in across landscapes collaboratively with other businesses in organizations like the CGF Forest Positive Coalition, we believe that we can have a greater positive impact than just investing in our own supply chains.
I can piggyback on that a little bit. So I think two things on this, and one is sort of leakage, within companies and supply chains, and one is sort of between them. And I think the within them, which is to say, we're going to not buy from the Amazon because we want to, not deforest the Amazon, but then we start buying from the Cerrado, and all of a sudden there's massive land clearance in the Cerrado. That's where I think something like the accountability framework, something like SBTI, something like SBTN, where they say these need to be comprehensive. This isn't just one market. Your commitments and your targets need to cover your entire supply chain. I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle, because even sort of because deforestation frontiers move. Like you said, it's whack-a-mole. If you reduce expansion over here, it's going to want to expand over there. So I think within a company, doing what McDonald's and other companies that are setting these company-wide targets are doing, to say we're going to assess risk across all of our supply base and keep on doing that, I think is a really important step. The between markets is obviously harder, and I think the easy answer is, well, to bring up the floor you really need regulation, and everyone says that, and it's true. But I think that when you have leading companies showing that it's possible, operating together, community to governments that actually they would welcome this regulation, it's easier for that to happen, to bring up the floor. So I think as far as what we can actually do, it's have the companies who are trying to do this work across their whole supply chains, have them do it in such a way that they can then advocate for the policies that are going to sort of try to decrease the leakage markets. None of it's easy, but I think that's sort of the best path forward we've got at the moment.
So just to add briefly to that, I mean, from a first glance, the supply chains seem very complicated, very complex, long. So I think one key element to add to all of this is to bring transparency, to bring data, bring information, to understand where the deforestation is taking place and for what. And I think what we've been doing is putting this data to understand that, and we see that deforestation is not evenly distributed. It happens in concentrated areas, and those areas can be prioritized. Obviously, we need jurisdiction approaches. We need systems that tackle, address deforestation as a whole. But there are areas where it can be prioritized in the beginning to drive more effective and systemic change. And I think in those areas, bringing the actors that are acting on those areas are key to work together to address the problem. So definitely collaboration, I think, is a key element to address this as well.
I couldn't agree with you more. And the traceability is a means to an end. It's not the end itself. It would be lovely to know where absolutely everything comes from all the time. And if we can get to that place, brilliant. But right now, what we need to do is make sure that we know enough to know where we should be taking action and the type of actions we should be taking and with who. and then it's a case of moving into that implementation mode and making sure that we're injecting investment on the ground collaboratively with others.
So I think sticking with this theme a little bit of how do we make sure that the actions we're taking really produce change that we want to see. We know there's also a lot of more demand side measures, reducing food loss and waste. We talked a little bit also about increasing productivity on farms, so this increase in efficiency. And while those are actually also really strong climate levers in their own right, there's also this really great potential in this context for that to alleviate pressure for expansion so that there's less of this movement to need to clear agricultural land. But I think we learned a really strong lesson from the electricity usage, which is when you increase efficiency, you often paradoxically actually increase consumption. So that link between efficiency doesn't necessarily translate immediately to lessening, in this case, our pressure on these natural ecosystems. So another really tough question for all of you. How do we effectively link some of these more demand side and efficiency measures and make sure that they're actually reaching these areas where we are, and these actors where we are seeing this active conversion and deliver on that synergy?
I can take a first stab at this. Again, starting with some of the research that I was just presenting from work with Ad Astra. So in terms of the productivity side of it, because a lot of these emissions reductions are about intensity, how many tons of carbon are you making per ton of soy or cocoa or palm oil, there are some real win-wins for productivity and emissions reduction, where if companies can make, if producers can grow more food on the same land, that food is going to have generally lower emissions footprint. So for example, we looked at this in soy and in palm, and there's like a little bit there. There's evidence that you can increase yields by 5%, 10%, and see some small sort of emissions intensity reduction. In cocoa, for example, which is an example I didn't put up here, data shows that in a lot of cocoa growing areas, there's a huge potential for yield increases, up to sort of doubling yield using known methods, which would basically have emissions intensity for that cocoa. So there's this win-win where if you're supporting producers to increase productivity, they're making more money, you're reducing your emissions footprint, your emissions intensity, like this is great. The question then becomes, well, as you said, does increasing productivity say, well, now that land's more valuable, so great, let's go clear some more land. So, how do we meet these productivity increases, which are essential for both for food security and for, doing that in a way that meets climate goals? Again, how do you prepare that? How do you pair that with where's the long-term conservation that's associated with that? If you're a company that's investing in productivity, are you also investing in nearby conservation? If you're a government that is doing extension, that's working on productivity processes, are there safeguards there to not have that just expand outward to meet that? So I think as with all these things, it's this balance between these two pieces that is hard, but it's where we've got to get to.
This is a very difficult question to answer, and I think it varies from commodity and context that we are talking about, right? There is no single silver bullet, that's for sure. But I think one element is we need to approach this in a holistic way, and I think that's when looking through the lens of food system is so important, because we cannot convince farmers to change their behavior if we don't bring alternative for them. I was just in Altamira last week, and that's part of the arch of deforestation where the Trans-Amazonic cross the Amazon, and we see a lot of those fish bone spines with the deforestation. And seeing some people producing cocoa, I think bringing this perspective that if we need to change, we need to provide solutions and alternatives, and I think bringing this perspective of more diversification of food systems is not just about planting soy for the production of feeds, but this shift also comes with shifts in diets, also comes with better use of the food system, food waste, food loss, and all of that. So I think we need to think a bit beyond and outside of the box and beyond what we work on more directly, and connecting what other solutions that are bringing, especially to diversify the food systems. Then I think we will see more solutions coming in and more agreement, more coming to the middle ground where the farmers see it as a benefit and also as a benefit for environment, also a benefit for health consumption, right? So I think it's all connected.
And I think that it's not an either-or situation. If you're going to invest in regenerative agriculture, that doesn't mean that we're not interested in deforestation conversion free anymore. That absolutely is part and parcel of investing in a regenerative agriculture system, is making sure that you're maintaining natural ecosystems because of all of those ecosystem services benefits that your farm is getting from there. But that transition to different ways of farming is it's new to people. And I mentioned the fact that we have to work with millions of farmers or through our suppliers with millions of farmers around the world. We have to give farmers confidence that they can change their systems, that they can experiment with things. We know regenerative agriculture is very site specific, and what works in one farm won't work with another. What works in one field won't work with another. What works in one year might not work in another. And that's a risk to any business, to transition into a different system that you're not entirely sure of, that's quite complicated, is a risk. And we need to be there to provide mentoring, provide support, provide the services that those farmers need to be able to take that risk, particularly at a time where we're seeing in a lot of areas of the world potentially that underlying support that farmers get being swept away. And so that risk and reward ratio needs to be right for those businesses to take a business decision to change what they're doing, because it will be inherently in their interests to ensure that their farming systems are more resilient, and it's also in our interests and in the interests of our suppliers to help those farmers to make that happen on the ground. But that doesn't mean that we don't have the deforestation conversion commitments. It just means that we need to make sure that we're providing an extra incentive for farmers to make great choices.
I'll add one more quick one, because it's a complicated question, and just to sort of like, I think maybe quick touch on the elephant in the room, which is like the cow in the room, and to say this next to McDonald's, but all of these, all of the figures show that the lion's share of this land use change is associated with beef. Most of the pathways that get us to 1.5 involve a demand shift away from eating as much meat. Very fortunately, that's not my job. It's somebody else's job. But I think it is important to start to be able to say that. It's something that nobody likes to say. Asking people to change their diets is a hard and scary thing to do. And the path forward is going to be incredibly diverse, and it's going to be different in every single context. But I think have to say that that's going to be a part of the solution one way or the other.
Definitely a really complicated situation. And so I know you all know that I have some other questions teed up, but I don't want to monopolize my curiosity at the expense of our audience. So do want to check, are there folks who want to ask a question here? Yeah, I see Jean there in the back.
Hello, and congratulations for the brilliant presentations. There are several things that I wanted to say. So we observed, for instance, that in the Amazon, the land use change is very much caused by cattle. But there is a strong explanation in that, which is called Amazon soy moratorium, that has been in play for the last almost 15, 16 years. And that was a very strong traceability system at the level of a biome that managed to curb direct conversion through soy from 25% of deforestation to less than 1% in a few years, and that held it for quite a long time. And it's now threatened. So we might see a drastic change in the color of that map from blue to red. Also in the rest of the Amazon, unfortunately, in part of it, I would say. So my question is, things are very dynamic. So we are talking about different situations and commodities. Commodities can shift from one to another, and we attack one bit and it's going on the other side. And I understand very much and appreciate all the efforts of a leading company like McDonald's on working on these practical, tangible solutions. There is a new emerging role for this as well from governments. So we've seen governments having a traceability system at the jurisdictional level starting to be put in place. Would that be some part of a solution on trying to provide a level playing field on transparency, like a systemic work on transparency that not to put that in the sole hands of individual companies, but also having something much more comprehensive and systemic in terms of transparent supply chains and working on these leakages. So sorry for the long question.
Thank you, Jean. And yeah, I suppose that shows the benefits of collaboration and taking a collaborative approach, that we can achieve real change in a fairly short period of time, and that there is a role there for everybody. And we have seen a lot of countries around the world introduce more traceability at a mandated government level, and that certainly is able to help companies to put in place systems to understand the risk and the impact of their sourcing choices as well. There's no doubt in that. And so, from a perspective of one company acting alone to do this, and McDonald's were acting alone in some areas for quite a while, with the support of our suppliers in different regions as well, but we're only able to go so far. There are dependencies that we rely on, taking that collaborative approach, making sure that all actors understand, well, this is the part that I could play in achieving what we need to achieve, which is resiliency of farming systems in our view, de-risking of sourcing areas, protection of natural environments, then that would be great. Yeah, that would be brilliant. We would welcome more collaboration, welcome more different bodies getting involved in helping to solve some of these problems.
Sure, I'll take a quick one, which I think and not to step on Trace's toes over here, but I think that the data environment is changing so unbelievably quickly right now. The data we have about land use change, about drivers of land use change, about emissions associated with that land use change, is just kind of multiplying by the day. The ways in which we can analyze it and make sense of it is going crazy. I'm not going to say the AI words, but everybody's talking about the AI words. So I think that that creates a space to have a centralized place to actually do some of this good work and analysis that can be used by multiple actors, by governments, by countries, by companies, by civil society. I think that the data are there to answer these questions with really, I think, surprising accuracy at a range of different scales already. So it's just a question of how do we sift through it, how do we synthesize it, how do we make it available at the scales where it's needed, and I think that's going to create a huge amount of efficiency in monitoring, hopefully soon.
Okay, I'm not seeing any hands at the moment, so we've touched a couple times, folks have mentioned this transparency and traceability, and I think that often kind of goes hand in hand with this discussion on deforestation and conversion free. And curious on your perspectives as we start to think about moving from deforestation and conversion free supply chains, ideally to deforestation and conversion free regions and sectors, and how does that look? What is the kind of evolving role of how we think about that transparency and traceability as ideally we really succeed in driving that on the ground change?
Well, I think we all know here, maybe in this room, that the importance of traceability and transparency. But we are also trying to influence other stakeholders that don't see the value as much of traceability for deforestation. But I think, so that's why we need to think smartly about our narrative. And I think when we talk about traceability, we cannot deny the importance of traceability to understand where our food comes from. It's good for everyone. It's good for any government. It's good for any country. Traceability is important because then you understand the risks of your supply, the risks of the food security of your country, the risks of a company in terms of not getting the supply that you need or changes in price. So we need to think about traceability as an important tool for food security, for understanding your risks and for thinking about how to mitigate your risks. And therefore, we can also link that to environment and social impacts, right? So I think by bringing this more and more clear in panels, in discussions, in dialogues, I think we can bring the win-win of solution, right? And I think that's what happened in the sector in Brazil when they first developed the GTA. This information when a farmer has to send like a batch of cows from one farm to another, they had to provide information for sanitary purposes that then started being used for traceability, for transparency. And I think that it's a win-win. So I think we should do more of that. How can we be more smart and more to think of solutions that are good for people, are good for business, and are good for the environment?
And yeah, and we have and we will continue to use all available data that we can to improve our insight into those types of areas to understand where to take action. In terms of that broadening out from supply chains to landscapes generally, or supply sheds, the focus that touches on the focus that I was talking about in terms of that de-risking supply chain, de-risking potential supply. So making sure that I'm able to not only provide incentives for our suppliers, our farmers to do the right thing, but also for others farmers to do the right thing. Because a lot of our chains, farmers will not supply the same product year in, year out at the same volume at the same time. They will come in and come out of supply chains due to crop rotations and different things going on with their farm. And so we need to have a supply base which is broader. We need to invest more broadly, but we also need to think about what are the shared benefits that we're all getting from that investment. So a lot of what we do is driven, as you see my title, driven by climate as well as nature. And in climate, you do have to slice and dice in terms of emissions and working out, well, which emissions are allocated to each person. There are a whole bunch of things that we do not need to be doing in terms of allocating those benefits. Clean water is a benefit to everybody in that water basin, and also is not just of interest to food companies, to governments. It's of interest to utility companies, to water companies in there, to other municipal functions as well that could come and collaborate on projects. And we see this in other parts of the world where we see that collaboration across lots of different interest groups into here to be able to invest in those landscapes, and that delivers a whole host of benefits from the environment, but also from a food perspective of ensuring that we have a resilient food supply in those countries.
Really quickly, he's going to tie those two things together, which is to say, yes, we need to know where food comes from, both so we can understand risk and address risk, and also so we can use leverage to support improvement. So at the same time, the thing that is, I think, so specific about deforestation is that it happens before it's in anybody's supply chain. Like, deforestation happens before the farm is there. And so if it's thinking about, okay, how do I trace it to this farm that I'm buying from, it's too late. So I think that's where we're moving into, okay, how do we think about this as a landscape where I'm thinking about the farms that I'm buying from, the farms that my peers are buying from, and the farms that aren't there yet and are going to be in the future, and thinking about what the scale is to act collaboratively to sort of create that next new farm from happening is, I think, where this conversation around landscapes, around supply sheds, around sort of, how are we actually monitoring and managing these things at the right scale is like where we're headed right now, which I think is like a really good direction.
One last thought, and also doing this pretty competitively, not saying, well, this has to be a program that is just entirely our program right from conception to finish. We've just invested in PCI because we think it's the right thing to do. We are that's something that I think we need to see more of in this space. Is if there are good things that are being done by others, how do we scale them? How do we work with them to scale them? How do we replicate what they're doing in an area maybe that it's not being done, and invite collaboration back from other people as well? So I think we need to continue to regard this space as a pre-competitive space because it benefits all of us.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, I think no better note can we end on than we need collaboration, keeping this in a pre-competitive space and really thinking about how we get ahead of deforestation and getting to these issues before we have already lost these ecosystems that we so fundamentally depend on. And thank you all so much for attending and for your attention, and hopefully also your continued engagement and collaboration on this issue going forward, and wish you all the best at the rest of this COP. Thank you all so much.